All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Let's go ahead and it's 11 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get started here. So again, welcome. My name is Mason Jones, and today I'm going to be the host of the webinar, The Art of Personal Finance, the Importance of Being Coachable. All right. I'd like to start with a couple housekeeping items. First, the information disclosed in this webinar is current as of the date noted and is for informational purposes only and does not contend to address the financial objective, situation, or specific needs of any individual investor. Any information is for illustrative purposes only and is not intended to serve as investment, legal, or tax advice, since the availability and effectiveness of any strategy is dependent upon your individual facts and circumstances. Results will vary, and no suggestion is made about how any specific solution or strategy will perform in reality. With that said, today's webinar is presented by Kelly Lewis and Todd Brost. All right, Kelly graduated from the Georgetown University Law Center with a Master's of Law degree in Tax and Estate Planning. She's a certified financial planner and licensed attorney in New York and New Jersey. She's been with JGUA for 6 years and is an advisor on Jason Nickerson's team. Todd, aka Coach, he's a former college, Olympic, and professional athlete. He's a seasoned advisor with 14 years plus of experience at JGUA. So without further ado, I'll let these two, they got a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so I'll let you guys get after it. Welcome.
All right, thanks, Mason. Today, Todd and I are going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about money mindsets, which may be a new term to several of you. So we all have positive and negative money beliefs, most of which are absorbed during our childhood and during our upbringing. So these hidden money beliefs are intertwined with how we view risk, happiness, and even our own self-worth. So these internalized mindsets impact the way we save, spend, and even just view money in general. So today we're going to discuss 4 money mindsets and how to identify them within yourself, how they negatively or positively impact our interactions with money. And then our resident coach, Todd, is going to discuss some thoughts on how to utilize coaching with an advisor, a financial advisor, or even self-coaching that can help you overcome the negative mindsets, work with the positive ones, and have that overall healthy relationship with money. So remember throughout this presentation that money is just a tool. It helps you achieve that happy, productive, fulfilling life that we all strive for. It's not the destination, but the tool that you carry on your journey. So what is a money mindset exactly? A money mindset is an overriding attitude that you have about your finances in general. It drives how you make key financial decisions on a day-to-day basis. It can also have a big impact on your ability to achieve your goals. If you change your mindset about money, you tend to make better choices overall about how to overcome financial challenges. So in this case, the power of positive thinking really does matter long term. Your money mindset is like emotional inertia. It drives you to take action in your life. If you have a positive money mindset, you're more likely to be decisive about your finances and take the steps that you need to in order to succeed. On the other hand, negative mindsets tends to breed emotion that prevents action. Some of these emotions can be fear, or intimidation is one that I see a lot, defeatism, or even procrastination, and just the inability to take the next steps forward because you can't decide. If you don't feel like you can succeed, then you're less likely to act or even think about acting. So it seems easier just to ignore your finances because the challenges seem insurmountable. Seen in this light, it's not even debt or a low credit score or even lower income that's holding you back. It's really your perspective that you can't do any better. So then on the other hand, when you have a more positive money mindset, you will look for opportunities instead of seeing roadblocks. And if you see roadblocks, you'll do what you can to go around them. You'll recognize that every financial situation is fixable, even if you have to take small steps that add up to progress. And sometimes it can take years and be a slow process. And lastly, you'll see the value of asking for help instead of struggling silently. So the 4 mindsets we're going to be talking about today were actually discovered in a study done by the Fjord Institute and Accenture. They are achievers, balancers, experiencers, and explorers. Each of these mindsets has its own relationship with money and how they define success when it comes to money. So as we go through this, I want you to keep in mind 3 questions to ask yourself as we go through the beliefs and behaviors of each of these mindsets. When, where, and how. When do you think about money? Where do you think about money? And how hard do you think about money? These questions, when you can answer them to yourself, will help you determine which of these 4 money mindsets you fall into. So the reason we're going to focus on this particular mindset, though there are several studies out there with different sets of mindsets, because rather than focusing on positive versus negative mindset, I liked this study because it focuses more on what the beliefs and behaviors associated with each of these are. Once identified, each mindset can be coached to focus on the positive aspects and refocus the negative. None of these mindsets are by themselves positive or negative in nature, but rather have specific behaviors that can be coached to be more beneficial to your financial situation. So now I'm about to take you all back to your high school math classes. As you see here, there's a graph here we're going to take a peek at. So as you'll see on the graph, there's both a horizontal and vertical axis when it comes to these mindsets. Each of these can be a spectrum. You don't necessarily fall directly in one category. You may have tendencies of more than one. The goal is to be open about being coached to minimize some aspects of one and utilize aspects of others that may together bring you to this beneficial mindset and your relationship with money. So you'll see here that the vertical axis shows the difference between having a wide scope focus and a narrow scope focus. And the horizontal represents a high structure for planning versus a low structure. So with that, let's jump headfirst into discussing these mindsets. And again, as we go through them, your goal today is to see if you can identify which one you might be, and consider some of the coaching tips that Todd's come up with for each one of them. So the first one we're going to talk about is achievers. Achievers tend to have a wider scope focus and need higher structure. So for each one of these mindsets, I'm going to share some high-level demographics, but the study shows that our relationship with saving and spending is more than just these high-level demographics, and that our relationship with them is more important than these traditional demographics, such as age, gender, or income levels. But for example, achievers tend to skew male. They're under 30. Household type is whether you're single, married, or family, and is evenly spread across all of them. The income is just the levels of income you have, and those are spread across it as well. So achievers tend to know the exact long-term route to their financial goals, whether they drew the map themselves or sought professional planning guidance. So not only do they have a household budget set up, which would include retirement savings, insurance, education savings, but they also work toward a specific savings goal. So some of the key beliefs are that achievers tend to have a very wide focus on their finances and tend to forget the day-to-day minutia is just as important as well. They believe in a structured planning, but the planning is focused very broadly on long-term goals. And as long as they stick with the spirit of their plan, they feel in sync with what their plan is. Some positives here are that they'll focus on long-term planning, but concerns are that their broad scope of the plan may not be enough to get them where they need to be if they don't track it and they just set it and forget it. So some of the key behaviors to identify within themselves might be setting long-term goals, using general rules to guide decisions, using tools and resources to review the progress, not just making lists, and occasionally adjusting the spirit of the budget based on new situations while continuing to seek new information to alter their long-term plan. I really like using the term the spirit of the plan to describe achievers because I think it really captures the tendency to plan in this wide scope without it being narrow enough to necessarily capture or reach your goals. So with that in mind, Todd, what are some tips and some coaching ideas that you would have for working with achievers?
Well, thanks, Kelly. This is great. I hope we get to see maybe later in the presentation where we are in the 4 quadrants and maybe where we've been. I think it leads to some discussion, not only where we are or what quadrant we're currently in, but through our life changes and stages where we've been and maybe where we want to be. But I think with achievers, like you said, very focused on detail. I think from a financial perspective, some of the things that would be great for this group would be, the balance sheets, the cash flow analysis, sticking to and maintaining a budget. Meeting with this group on a regular basis is going to be very, very important, as well as monitoring their success and their progress. I think the one downfall and the one potential bump in the road for this group is realizing that either as an athlete or as someone taking care of their finances, there are just things that are out of our control. There are just some things that happen that we've got no control over. All we can control is how we react to these events. And I think in our line of work, some of these things we call triggering events, whether it's a dip in the market, a death in the family, maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's a job loss. All of those things are totally out of our control. I think with a sports or a coaching comparison, in hockey, you can't control the referee, you can't control the quality of the ice, you can't control the crowd, or now, I guess during COVID, the lack of crowd. But those are all things that are out of our control, yet we have to continue and fight through these. In sports, when these events occur, maybe it's a good time for a timeout or calling an audible at the line of scrimmage, getting refocused, getting relaxed, and getting back on track. And now we're through the short-term obstacles, and now we can continue to work towards our longer-term goals.
Yeah, I think those are some great tips, Todd. I like how you're talking about this. They tend to have a wide focus. So working with achievers, the focus would be to bring them in and narrow it down to help them actually reach their goals and set some goals.
Right, exactly right. And that's where, we talk about game film. And I was a big fan of that as a coach because you could get as specific and as detailed as you want. You could look at the opposing team and what they did as a group. You could look at the opposing team, break it down and see what they did individually, each player. You could look at your team, what you were doing well, what you weren't doing well. You could look at yourself. You could look at your teammate. Maybe if your teammate made a mistake, you could see that on video and see the detail and say, wow, that saves me from making that same mistake in a similar situation. So as a coach, I was a big fan of game film and breaking down plays and events into very small details so they could be understood at that level.
Great. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about, and as you'll see as we go through these, we're starting with higher structure planners, mindsets, and sort of broadening it out to people who don't plan as much. So the next ones are balancers. Tend to skew female, under 30. These tend to start with, they skew toward those family planners. I think mostly because families have more people, more goals, different goals that they need to plan for. And the income distribution is the same, it's equal across all incomes. So balancers tend to have a more narrow scope, focusing on the day-to-day and present planning, but still require that higher structure. So this is the broadest category. 47% of people fall into this category of balancers. So they have some goals worked out and have an idea of what they'd like to achieve. They just haven't yet worked out all the long-term details. So for instance, balancers may have a savings plan for retirement or education even, but they haven't really pulled everything together to form that overarching plan yet. It's still just out there. They haven't really focused in on doing that yet. So as far as their beliefs go, balancers tend to need that high structure still, just like the achievers do. But rather than focusing on the long-term goals like achievers, they focus on the little things, the day-to-day minutia. Financial savings, credit card bonuses, their credit score is a big one, and even getting a good deal in the moment are all very important beliefs to balancers. They like to have that control over their day-to-day financial wellness, but doing this can actually sometimes cause too much stress within their day-to-day lives as they focus on the little things and not too much on the long-term goals and needs. So that's where they may hit some snags in this situation. So the behaviors you can identify with balancers is that you'll see that they're really focused narrowly on the short term, as I mentioned. Things like capturing that best deal. They also tend to meticulously and frequently track their finances. I know some people who update their budget every day and check their investment accounts every day, and that's that minutia focus that tends to be a behavior of balancers. So they'll rely on a tight schedule and even make trade-offs of some expenses for other expenses each month during their financial plan. So note, in these 5 behaviors that are listed, you don't see anything about planning for the long term. Focusing too much on the present can actually hinder balances from reaching their future goals. So the positives here are that they're staying on track with their current financial situation and really monitoring that day to day so they know what's going on. But again, that offset is that there's really very little long-term outlook. So with that in mind, and knowing that these are kind of the opposite of achievers, Todd, what would be some thoughts about working with balancers?
I think for this group, Kelly, probably, some rewards and some things to say nice job for what they're doing in the short term. I think one of the points that really jumped out at me for this group was their aversion to risk. And as a coach, and sometimes when I ran some of my hockey teams, and within a game, if I had a situation or a player similar to a balancer, maybe the game was close to being over, maybe it's very lopsided in score one way or the other. And this would be a great opportunity when, as a coach, you could put these players in and say, go have some fun, take a chance, go for it. We're either way behind in this game or we're way ahead and it's close to being over. So the risk aversion is one point that really hit home with me on this group. The other thing was the credit card points, and that being so important, sort of a reward for shorter term accomplishments. As a coach, I was a big fan of this, where whatever city we were in, there was always restaurants that wanted to be involved with the team, and they would give me as a coach, some passes or some coupons for free dinners. And I think for balancers, this is pretty important. They get rewarded for their accomplishments. But I think as a coach and as an investment advisor for this group, like you said, the longer term picture, the longer term focus has to be kept in mind. And I think as a coach, we need to feel a little bit of accountability for this group and sometimes offer some constructive correction to this group of balancers, just so we can keep that long-term goal and that future at the top of their mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great points. I like the rewards, and I think that balancers may tend to focus and see the negative more often than they see the positive in their choices, as following their budget and their finances day to day can actually get really overwhelming and stressful. And that working with a coach, it would be our job to pull them back from that. And like you said, just go have some fun in the game. It doesn't always have to be about the score. Yeah, and just have some fun too. So those are some great tips.
I agree with that, and I think from a financial planning standpoint, I think you said sort of the demographic of this group is female, young family, and having gone through that stage with 3 young kids of my own, you just don't think that the cash flow can support a small trip or a camping excursion, when if it can, that would be a huge reward and a huge pat on the back, and it may go a really, really long way for a balancer to stay focused and continue on to achieving their goals.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, Todd. I like that thought of setting not always just long-term goals, but short-term goals as well, because then they're getting these bigger rewards more often, and that can keep them focused on the long term while still working in the short term. That's a great tip.
Yeah, I think that's one thing with goals. I mean, you want to retire, and you want, hopefully at this age, and you want to have this much of investable assets at that time, but there's lots of steps before that, and climbing a huge mountain always starts with one step. So let's break that down into smaller goals and smaller accomplishments, and then in the meantime, we will ultimately work towards that final goal.
Absolutely. All right, the next one we'll be talking about are experiencers. So these people tend to have a more narrow scope focus, but also have a lower structure requirement. These also tend to skew female. The age is evenly spread across all stages of life. Household type, again, evenly spread. And the income skews higher, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. So experiencers tend to put forth the bare minimum and may or may not get to the rest of planning later. So most people in this group have a budget or a plan to address some savings goals, but not both. So their comprehensive financial planning behaviors don't really differ much from the next group that we'll talk about, explorers. They are relatively non-existent as far as planning goes in both of these groups. So, and you'll see here that the overarching beliefs of experiencers is really to live life to the fullest. Why save when you can spend? I think that's a question that stays in their minds a lot. So while they may have finances in the back of their minds, they tend not to plan with it. It's just there. So as you saw on the previous slide, this mindset tends to come with having more income. So in this mindset, the experiencer doesn't have to worry about money as much because they have enough money already. And they also tend to be resilient and less emotionally affected by an unexpected financial situation. So they're able to be a little bit freer with their money because they have a little bit more of it. So because of that, they tend to put that planning on the back burner rather than bringing it to the forefront and working with it. So also convenience and efficiency in regard to the planning and the use of their money is extremely important to experiencers. Like I mentioned, they love to get out there and live life. They don't want to spend their time keeping track of a day-to-day budget or planning for the long term. They would rather use the funds they get as it comes in to spend it on their day-to-day quality of life. So some of the key behaviors of experiencers really include automation of their finances, which can actually lead to splurges. Automation allows like bills, transfers, and investments to be done without close monitoring. It's more and more common in this day and age to set things up to be automated. But too much automation, I think we can all agree, Todd may agree with this, too much automation can actually be worrisome, because too much automation will really lead to less monitoring of their finances, which can lead to splurges and living outside of your means. So if this happens to an experiencer, they will rationalize that behavior that otherwise might make them feel guilty about overspending and not monitoring enough. So they might not catch mistakes or major changes to their financial situation. So while it's important to them to have automation and do that, it's not necessarily the best thing for them. I tend to label this group, after researching this, I like to call them the "I'll get to it one day" or "I'll change this later" group. So that's what I think about them. And, how would you coach, Todd, the more loose mindsets on the spectrum of planning?
This is a great slide. I love the picture that you found for this one, Kelly. And I don't know if my wife and or my daughter are on this listening, but they both fall into this category for sure. I think with both of them being nurses, especially what the whole world has gone through in the last 9 or 10 months or so, they both have the attitude about living for today and spending and enjoying themselves now. I think as a financial planner, this may be one of the more challenging groups, just because they are celebrating after every game. So I think from coaching and a sports comparison, I'm going to bring up a name that will get some people involved for sure. But during the NFL playoffs, a guy by the name of Tom Brady, who I share an alumni with at the University of Michigan, I think he's one of the greatest ever. But a story about him regarding experiencers, so many of us accomplish something or win a game, and the immediate, I think, human nature is to celebrate. Let's enjoy it. Let's experience the celebration. And the story about Tom Brady, most all NFL games are on Sunday. And when he was with the Patriots, they had their own plane after a game. Everyone's on the plane, maybe having some beverages. They won the game. There's some celebrating. They're looking forward to going home, being with friends, being with family. Monday's a day off. Tuesday, they go back to the field and start getting ready. Maybe Wednesday or Thursday, the vast majority of the players are getting focused about who they're going to play the following Sunday. Tom Brady actually has many times been reported to be watching game film on the plane on Sunday afternoon after they just won a game, based on who they're going to play the following Sunday. So that's kind of a neat comparison, where I think experiencers aren't quite like that. They won the game, they want to enjoy it, they want to spend some money, and they've accomplished their very, very short-term goals now, and let's have some fun. But I think as a coach, you have to keep this group very closely monitored, and let's enjoy our successes periodically, but let's keep some longer goals in mind as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like that example, and I like how, you mentioned that your daughter and your wife are really experiencers, especially during the last 9 to 10 months, which actually brings up a thought that probably, I've seen a lot, and I don't know if this is the case with you, Todd, and your clients, but I've seen a lot of people really do a complete 180 with what type of mindset they have during this pandemic, because so much has changed. I've seen spenders go to saving because there's not really anything to do, and vice versa. Savers are going to spending a lot of money on food because what else is there to do? Have you come across that as well?
Absolutely. I think for the most part, the pandemic has helped people's cash flow, because you really, like you said, your people that usually travel or vacation aren't being able to do that, which definitely helps the balance sheet for sure, and the budgets. But the other part of that is the human interaction, and I think with a lot of my clients and prospects as well, they're just missing the human interaction. And I think as a nurse and as a frontline worker, you see a lot of things that the rest of us don't see on a day-to-day basis, and it might influence which one of these groups you're in. But I think, like I said, for my wife and daughter, they enjoy their days off, and they enjoy the money that they make and spend it in the current time. So bless their hearts. But I think this is a group that like you said, as a coach or as an advisor, we need to be very careful with and keep the focus on and stretch that focus out for a longer term.
Yes, definitely. Which brings us to the last mindset of the day, which are the explorers, which have a very wide scope focus and have low structure. So, like Todd, I like what you said about having clients who miss the human interaction. I see that with a lot of my clients right now as well, and there's something to in-person meetings that having the phone and Zoom calls or GoToMeeting webinars just isn't the same thing. So having that switch up your mindset as well, and I think it's really affecting us all, is this lack of human interaction, and what we as a coach can do and what our clients can do as the players can really try to focus in on determining what they need as far as human interaction goes. And it's funny because we brought that up right as we get to the explorers, which one of the things you'll see me talk about on the next slide is that they really like to be left alone. They really exhibit no comprehensive financial planning behaviors. And less than 1% of them are likely to create a comprehensive plan in the near future. So similar to experiencers, their income tends to be higher because they have more flexibility. These skew with family, which I actually found very interesting, and is evenly spread across age groups and genders. So they're similar to experiencers, but even I think less focused than the experiencers have. They'll just kind of float from bill to bill without having any sort of strategic approach to their money management. So some of their key beliefs for explorers are that they're really laid back and relaxed. They care much more about the quality of their life than the structure of it. So too many financial rules in place for explorers would actually inhibit their lives. So why be anxious about finances when everything is ultimately going to be okay in the long term? That's kind of the attitude that they take toward their finances. So, and one of the ways I like to describe this, I don't know about what you picture, Todd, but when I'm describing these explorers, I tend to think of them as the hippies of the financial mindsets, very laid back and relaxed. And while some flexibility and a lower structure is okay, it might reduce the day-to-day stress. The concern with explorers is that they may hit a financial situation that's extremely difficult to remedy, and they may even choose not to change their approach to finances even as their life situation changes. If they want no involvement at all, how can we get them involved? So some of the key behaviors that explorers exhibit is that they tend not to work with financial services, coaches, or advisors. And if they do, they rarely engage. And I have some clients who are very much like this. They're very much hands-off. They hire us to do the management, and they check in with them once a year or so, and that's really all that they require. So they tend to fly by the seat of their pants, pay bills as they go, and then move on from it. And they use their gut to make financial decisions, which I think we can all think of a situation right now where we've used our gut to make a decision and it didn't turn out too well. So that's not necessarily the best strategy. There's very little focus on either short or long-term planning in this mindset. So they're definitely not dwellers, and they may even spend now and put off paying till later and just endure the consequences. Their approach to new situations is quite practical, and they tend to use lists versus automation or online tools or resources. So I would say that explorers are the loosest mindset, and may be, in the end, the ones that need some coaching the most, but are also the least likely to seek it out. So, Todd, how would you approach coaching to somebody who wants minimal engagement, if any at all? And what can the explorers do if they have that tendency? What can they do to be more engaged with their financial planning?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting group, and I think my comparison for this group of explorers is sort of the superstar player. My background is in hockey, so the GOAT, in my opinion, the greatest of all time was Wayne Gretzky. Just turned 60, I saw on Facebook the other day. But these type of athletes, they get into that zone, and like you said, they really rely on their gut. They're so natural. And when these players always got interviewed, the person conducting the interview always said, "What were you thinking at this particular time?" or "What went through your mind when you scored this goal?" or what were you thinking about? And they often get a blank look and sort of say, "Well, I really wasn't thinking," and I get into the zone or I get into this groove, and that's when they're at their best. And as a coach or as a financial advisor, oftentimes maybe you just have to leave them when they're in that zone and things are going very, very well. The other thing that Wayne Gretzky said, that when he played, everything seemed so slow and so easy. It was like he was up in the press box 200 feet above the rink. He could see exactly where the other 11 players were on the ice. He could see how much time he had. Everything seemed so easy, and to the rest of us, that is sure not the case. So I think this group they're good until they're not good. Things are going well, let's leave them. But I think as coaches or as advisors, this group would not make a good coach. Wayne Gretzky actually tried to coach in the top level of hockey, and he didn't have very good results, because I think as a star athlete, if his team was losing by a goal, in his mind, it was, gee whiz, I guess I've got to go score two for us to have some success. That's great if you can do it, but for the rest of us that couldn't, you had to buy into the team plan, and you had to buy into the team strategies and rules, and hopefully as a team overcome that one goal deficit and get the game winning goal. But this is really an interesting group, and I think, like you said, they play it with their gut and intuition, but I think we need to be on the sideline ready to jump in when it doesn't go as well as they hope.
Yeah, I really like that thought about there are really just some people who don't need that hands-on approach, and as advisors or coaches, you have to determine if that's the case. And while you work on the sidelines to make sure you're doing everything you can to help these explorers reach their goals, you're sort of taking the burden from them so that they can go live their life, while you're sort of in the background managing everything. And that's kind of what they would need, I think. It's a great point, because most of the time you think of working with clients on a regular basis, but there really are just sometimes where you need to step back and let them live their life how they want, while you're just taking charge of everything in the background.
That's exactly it. And I think as a coach, this was really the toughest group to deal with, because like you said, when do you jump in? And a lot of these players were so gifted naturally, and that they sometimes cut corners, meaning they knew they had to score 2 goals for the team to win, so they cut down on some of their defensive responsibilities. And as a coach, you need to know when to step in, because the other players are saying, "Well, coach, why are you telling me I have to do this to get this result, when this player is not doing that, but he's getting the same result, maybe even a better result?" So this is a really interesting group. And like you said, I think our timing of when we need to jump in as an advisor or a coach and give guidance to this group is really important.
Definitely. So those are the basics of the 4 groups here. And after walking through all of these mindsets, I want you all to think about, as we're finishing up here, if you can identify where on this graph you think you'll fall. So Todd and I had some fun after putting this presentation together, trying to determine where we would fall personally. As you'll see on this version of the chart, I threw us both on there about where we think that we would fall. I think it's quite interesting to see that even certified financial planners can use a little bit of work to reach towards that center of the graph more and be more well-rounded as far as how we look at finances. That even as advisors, our own personal money mindsets come into play with how we coach as well. So there's definitely a part to look at as being a coach and being the player, and that how your mindset can really affect all aspects of your life. And it's good for us to use this spectrum to know how we can best work with clients, or if you are an attendee on the webinar, how you can best work with your coach or your advisor. While it's important to know how to be coachable, you also want to know how you can change and develop that healthy relationship with money. And it's important to be able to build that relationship with an advisor, or even with yourself if you manage your own finances, to become the best version of yourself that you can be, and take the positive aspects of each of these categories and sort of merge them into what works best for you. So I know I'm personally a little bit of an achiever, a little bit of a balancer, and kind of an explorer. It's really hard to identify it, but I definitely know that I lean toward a higher structure, and I am one of those people who may monitor my own finances a little too closely. And after doing this presentation, maybe I will learn to pull back on that a little bit. Todd, what are your comments on your own?
I think this is a great grid, and when you asked me sort of where I thought I was, I had a really tough time, because some of the questions came into mind where, which quadrant did I used to be in? Which quadrant am I in now? Which quadrant would I like to be in? I think, going back pre-kids, I was probably more of an experiencer, where I wanted to travel, I wanted to spend, I wanted to live for the day, live for the moment. And then I think probably, and I think the balancer, the demographic was a young family. I think I eventually moved into balancer, where I was risk averse, and if I could get a free flight from a credit card, I was over the moon happy. And now, maybe a little bit more into the achiever and even some of the explorers. So it's really cool not only to see where you think you are, but where you've been and maybe where you'd like to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are really great points, is that you do change throughout your lifetime depending on what's important. And, I thought it's very interesting, because I would say when I was younger as well, I would just spend with no regard to debt or long-term savings. And which is interesting, because when they did this study, it showed that the explorers and experiencers were equally spread across all age ranges, and that it was the achievers and balancers that tended to skew under 30. I would have thought it would have been the opposites, as I know it's hard to get those 22-year-olds to start saving for a retirement that's 40 plus years away. It just seems so far. Yeah.
So does that mean if I'm in that quadrant, I'm in my 30s, Kelly? Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's dial it back a little bit. Wind the clock back.
Thank you.
So, Todd, do you have any last comments on coaching for these quadrants?
No, I think this is great. I think this really taught me a lot and opened my eyes. And I think anything like this, when you can learn more about yourself and your role as a family financial coach, it's fantastic. And the more we can learn about our clients and maybe which quadrant they fit into, will help us help them more efficiently. So I think this was fantastic, and I really learned a lot. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of it.
Absolutely. We were happy to have you. I had some great tips that I never would have thought of, as I was never a coach in my path. So thank you for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mason for some last minute notes pitches and see if we have any questions out there.
All right. Thank you, Kelly and Todd. Very interesting conversation there. Nice work. I know myself. I feel like I wake up maybe at 10 o'clock in the morning. I could be a balancer, and by 3 p.m. I might be an achiever. Who knows? I'm all over the place on that board. Either way, nice work. So thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions, we're about to close this up. So at this point, feel free to email us at any time at info@jgua.com. Also, be sure to follow us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We are on Twitter now as well. And also, one of the other new avenues is one of our advisors, Andrew Barron, has started a financial commentary podcast. All right, he's already released one, and I believe his next one is coming up soon. And he's going to be interviewing John Allman himself, and they'll be talking about our story, his story, and investment philosophy. So again, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
All right. So we did have a question come in, and also in the chat box. We are posting links to our website and to the podcast if you're interested. So one of the questions we got is, what are some of the key characteristics that makes someone coachable to improve or maintain strong financial condition? So I have a couple thoughts on that, and we'll have Todd jump in. I think some of the key characteristics of being coachable, it's just that openness to acknowledge that nobody's perfect. And when you work with somebody, they may have some tips that you may not have thought of. For example, even in this webinar, with Todd's presentation on coaching, he's coming from a different perspective and had some ideas for coaching different money mindset groups that I wouldn't have thought of. And that being able to establish a relationship with your coach enough so that you can learn about each other and see what kind of development or financial process you fit with, I think that's very important as far as that goes. Todd, what about you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think those are great points. I think the other thing is just the perspective. I think when I went from playing to coaching, just standing behind the bench, just being 5 feet away from the playing surface, I saw so much more as a coach than I did as a player. As a player, you're sort of in the heat of the battle. As a client, it's your money, and you're worried about your goals, and you're worried about your budget, and you're worried about your retirement plan. And I think as a financial coach, we can take a step back and look at the entire picture rather than just bits and pieces. So I think we can see the whole game from a different perspective rather than just one little part of the game that each player is involved in.
Yeah, that's very true, and I think that's one of the things with John Ullman's, at least, that we pride ourselves on, is that we look at the whole picture, and having that perspective is very important when working with an advisor or a coach in any aspect of your life. So with that, no other questions came in. Next month, our webinar is on financial aid for February Financial Aid Awareness Month. We'll have Mason and Jason presenting that one. So keep an eye out for an email and invite to that one. It'll be very informative if you have some kids getting ready to attend college. And with that, if there are no other questions, we will end the presentation. Thank you all for being here today.